Let us begin, not with words, but with a yielding, not a striving, not a reaching out, not an attempt to grasp some truth with the mind, but a gentle surrender to what already is. For before there can be any understanding of how to respond to disrespect, insult, criticism, or attack, there must first be a return to stillness. And the stillness is not an absence of activity, it is the recognition of the activity of God. Be still and know that I am God. Not be still and think about God. Not be still and ask God to do something. But be still and know. Most of the difficulties that trouble us in human relationships arise because we attempt to meet movement with movement, noise with noise, force with force. The moment someone speaks sharply to us, misunderstands us, belittles us, or challenges our worth, the personal sense of self rises immediately to meet it. It wants to answer. It wants to justify. It wants to correct. It wants to defend. And yet, long before there was ever a word spoken to you or about you, there was already a presence established as your being. The kingdom of God is within you. That kingdom is not disturbed by tones of voice, facial expressions, social hierarchies, or human opinion. It is not shaken by disrespect because it does not derive its authority from the world. It is founded upon the rock of spiritual being. And it is only when we forget this inner kingdom that the outer appearance seems to gain power over us. Therefore, the first movement in what we call the Christ response is not outward at all. It is inward. It is the quiet recognition that before anything happened out there, something eternal was already happening within. The Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. And if the Father is doing the work, then there is no burden placed upon the personal self to react, to repair, or to retaliate. You see, when disrespect appears, it presents itself as an emergency. It announces something must be done now. But the Christ never responds to emergencies. The Christ responds only to truth. Jesus did not hurry when Lazarus was ill. He did not rush when the storm arose. He did not defend himself before Pilate. Why? Because he was not living in time and he was not reacting to appearances. He was abiding in the timeless consciousness of God's presence. I and my Father are one. That oneness is not something to be achieved in moments of conflict. It is something to be remembered, and remembrance begins in stillness. Not the stillness of suppression, but the stillness of recognition. A stillness that says quietly within itself, there is nothing happening here that can touch the life of God as me. When you begin here, you are no longer attempting to become spiritual in the moment of disrespect. You are simply returning to what already is. The peace that Christ gives is not manufactured. It is revealed. My peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth. The world gives peace when conditions improve. Christ gives peace before conditions change. This opening stillness is the laying down of arms, not because you are weak, but because there is nothing to fight. It is the refusal to take the bait of appearances. It is the acknowledgement that no word spoken by another has the power to define you, diminish you, or disturb the government of God within you. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. Holding your peace does not mean suppressing anger or pretending not to feel. It means standing still in the awareness that there is a presence here that precedes thought, precedes emotion, precedes reaction. And when this presence is acknowledged, something remarkable happens. The urgency to respond dissolves. The inner noise quiets. The personal sense begins to loosen its grip. This is why we begin here. Not with technique, not with instruction, but with recognition. Before you are ever called upon to respond to disrespect, you are first called to remember who stands at the center of your being. And when that remembrance takes place, the next steps unfold, naturally not by effort, but by grace. For where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Now, having returned, if only for a moment, to stillness, we must look honestly, gently, and without fear at what usually follows an appearance of disrespect, and we must do so without condemnation. For condemnation itself is part of the very illusion we are learning to transcend. When someone speaks to us harshly, ignores us, disrespects us, or treats us unjustly, there arises almost instantly a movement within. It may come as anger, it may come as hurt, it may come as embarrassment, fear, or a sharp sense of injustice. Sometimes it is loud and obvious. Sometimes it is subtle, almost polite, disguising itself as reason or righteousness. But whatever its form, it is the same impulse, the personal sense of I, asserting itself. Scripture calls this the carnal mind. Not evil, not wicked, not something to be hated, but something to be understood. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. Notice, it does not say to be carnally minded is sinful. It says it is death, separation, limitation, conflict, disturbance. And when disrespect appears, the carnal mind believes it has been threatened. This personal sense rises quickly and says, I must protect myself. It says, I must answer this. It says, I must correct this image before others see it. And often it even says, I am justified in reacting. Now, let us be very clear. This impulse is not a moral failure. It is not evidence that you are unspiritual. It is simply the reflex of a sense of self that believes it lives by human approval, human standing, human recognition. And as long as we are in this world, this reflex will present itself. Even the disciples argued, defended, misunderstood, and reacted long after they had left their nets to follow the Master. So we do not condemn this impulse. We do not try to destroy it. We do not wrestle with it. We simply acknowledge it and see it for what it is, a suggestion, not an authority. Why is this so important? Because the moment you judge yourself for feeling offended, you have doubled the illusion. You have added condemnation to reaction. You have placed yourself back under the law of good and bad, right and wrong, spiritual and unspiritual, and you have strengthened the very personal sense you are seeking to transcend. Judge not that ye be not judged. That includes judging yourself. When the impulse arises to defend, to argue, to withdraw in resentment, or to strike back with words or silence, simply say within yourself, this is the human impulse to protect a personal sense of self. No drama, no shame, no resistance, just recognition. For the light of understanding alone begins the dissolving. Jesus never condemned the human condition. He said, they know not what they do. And this is true not only of those who disrespect us, but of ourselves when we react. The reaction does not mean you have failed. It means you are being shown where you still believe in a self that can be hurt. And that revelation is a gift For now something precious happens. When you stop condemning the impulse, you stop identifying with it. You begin to stand slightly apart from it. You see it as an activity, not your identity. You are no longer saying, I am angry or I am hurt. You are seeing that anger and hurt are movements passing through awareness, not definitions of being. Let the weak say, I am strong. Let the poor say, I am rich. Not because appearances deny themselves, but because truth stands prior to appearance. In this moment of recognition, you are not asked to suppress the feeling or act spiritual. You are asked only to see clearly, and clear seeing is already a form of healing. For when the personal sense is seen, it begins to lose its authority. It thrives on secrecy, on unconscious identification. But when it is brought into the light of awareness, it no longer rules. This is the gentle honesty of the Christ path. It does not demand perfection from the human self. It does not ask you to leap instantly into divine love. It simply invites you to stop accusing yourself and begin understanding. And understanding is the doorway through which grace enters. Now, having named the human impulse without condemning it, we are prepared for the next revelation, one that shifts the entire meaning of non-reaction and releases it from the false accusation of weakness. Now we come to a point where the human mind often stumbles, for when we speak of non-reaction, the world immediately translates this into weakness, avoidance, cowardice, or submission. And if we are not clear here, we may unknowingly resist the very activity of Christ within us, believing that we are being asked to give up strength, dignity, or justice. Nothing could be further from the truth. Non-reaction is not passivity. It is not silence born of fear. It is not the swallowing of resentment. It is not allowing wrongdoing to continue unchecked. Non-reaction, as revealed in Christ consciousness, is the highest form of spiritual authority because it proceeds from the understanding that there is no opposing power to react to. The world reacts because it believes in two powers, one good, one evil, one right, one wrong, one that must overcome the other. But Christ does not react because Christ knows only one power. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And when there is one power, reaction becomes unnecessary, even impossible. Reaction assumes that something has happened outside of God. It assumes that another will, another mind, another authority has entered the field. But Christ consciousness knows this is not so. Therefore, it does not rush to respond. It rests. It stands still. It allows the illusion to exhaust itself without being fed. Consider how often Jesus was challenged, mocked, accused, questioned, baited. By what authority doest thou these things? Show us a sign. He casteth out devils by the prince of devils. And yet, again and again, we find no reaction. Sometimes there is a word, sometimes a parable, sometimes silence, but never reaction, never emotional defense, never the attempt to prove worth or establish superiority. Why? Because Christ's identity does not need validation. If I bear witness of myself, my witness is not true. There is another that beareth witness of me. Non-reaction is grounded in the certainty that God is bearing witness to his own creation. You do not need to defend what God has established. You do not need to protect what God sustains. You do not need to correct appearances that have no law to support them. The human mind says, if I do not respond, they will think they are right. Christ consciousness says what they think cannot alter what is. The human mind says, if I do not react, I will be walked over. Christ consciousness says, there is no ground on which I can be diminished. The human mind believes reaction preserves dignity. Christ consciousness reveals that dignity is inherent and cannot be threatened. Let us be clear. Passivity is a form of fear. It is silence that says, I am afraid to speak. Non-reaction is silence that says, there is nothing here that requires a response from a personal sense of self. One is weakness, the other is dominion. This is why Scripture tells us, not by might, nor by power, but by my Spirit, saith the Lord. The might of personality argues, the power of spirit rests, and in that resting, order is revealed. When you do not react, you are not abandoning justice, you are refusing to create injustice within yourself. You are not enabling harm, you are refusing to empower illusion. You are not denying truth, you are standing in it so fully that error finds nothing to attach itself to. Reaction feeds the appearance, non-reaction starves it. Every argument requires two participants. Every conflict requires agreement. When you refuse to meet disrespect with reaction, you remove the fuel. And what remains, often to the surprise of the human mind, is clarity. Sometimes the situation resolves outwardly, sometimes it dissolves inwardly, sometimes it simply loses its importance. But in every case, peace is preserved. And peace is not weakness. Peace is the evidence of spiritual authority. My peace I give unto you, not the world's peace, which depends on circumstances, but my peace, which proceeds from knowing that nothing has occurred outside the government of God. This is why non-reaction cannot be practiced as a technique. It must be realized as a consciousness. If you try to be non-reactive while inwardly seething, you are merely suppressing reaction, and suppression will always seek expression later. But when non-reaction arises naturally from the realization of one power, there is no struggle, there is no repression, there is simply nothing to react to. Here we begin to glimpse the true strength of Christ. It is not the strength to overpower another, it is the strength to remain unmoved by appearances. It is the strength that comes from knowing that the life which animates you is God Himself, and that nothing external can interrupt that flow. And now, having seen that non-reaction is not passivity but spiritual authority, we are ready to examine more closely what disrespect actually is and what it is not. Now we must look more deeply, for here lies one of the most subtle and persistent errors of the human mind. The belief that disrespect is a cause. It presents itself as something that has happened to you, something done by another, something that now requires response, correction, or consequence. And yet, if we are to live in the Christ consciousness, we must learn to see disrespect as it truly is not a cause, but a claim. A claim is an assertion without law. It is an appearance seeking belief. It is a suggestion that says, I have power, when in truth it has none unless accepted. All discord in human experience appears in this way. Disease claims to be a power. Lack claims to be a power. Hatred, injustice, disrespect all make the same demand. Recognize me as real. But Christ consciousness never begins with the claim. It begins with God. In the beginning, God. Not in the beginning was insult. Not in the beginning was injustice. Not in the beginning was another person's opinion. In the beginning was God, and God is not divided against himself. Therefore, anything that presents itself as opposing harmony cannot be cause. It must be effect, an appearance arising from belief in separation. Now, the human mind says, but look what they did. Look what they said. And yes, the appearance is there. Jesus never denied appearances. He denied their power. He did not say the leper did not appear leprous. He said the leprosy had no authority. He did not say Lazarus was not dead. He said death was not a power. The mistake is not in noticing the appearance. The mistake is in assigning it causation. When someone disrespects you, the personal sense immediately concludes, this is why I feel disturbed. But that is not true. The disturbance does not come from the disrespect. It comes from the acceptance of the disrespect as something that has the authority to disturb. Nothing can enter your consciousness uninvited. This is not said to blame you. It is said to free you. For if the cause were truly external, you would be helpless. You would be at the mercy of other people's moods, words, and misunderstandings. But if the cause is internal, if it is the belief in a second power, then freedom is possible here and now. Jesus said, take heed what ye hear. He did not say, stop others from speaking. He said, take heed. In other words, be aware of what you are admitting into consciousness as truth. Disrespect is never an event. It is a proposal. It proposes that another person has power over your peace. It proposes that your value is subject to human judgment. It proposes that harmony must now be restored through personal action. Christ consciousness simply says, no, not angrily, not defensively, but calmly, clearly, silently. This no is not spoken to the person. It is spoken to the belief. It is the same get thee behind me that Jesus spoke not to Peter as a man, but to the suggestion that there could be a mind apart from God influencing events. For there is no cause but God. If God is the only cause, then God must also be the only activity. And if God is the only activity, then disrespect cannot be an action. It can only be a misinterpretation of appearances. And misinterpretations have no law, no continuity, no future. The moment you see disrespect as a claim rather than a cause, something loosens. You no longer feel compelled to answer it. You no longer feel obligated to correct it. You no longer feel diminished by it. Why? Because you have not granted it the status of reality. Many times people ask, but doesn't this let them get away with it? My friends, there is nothing to get away with when there is no power involved. You are not here to police the universe. You are here to bear witness to truth. And truth does not react to error. It reveals itself until error dissolves. Light does not argue with darkness. Light simply is when disrespect appears and you do not react. You are not ignoring truth. You are refusing to empower illusion. You are standing in the understanding that harmony does not need to be defended. It needs only to be recognized. And this is the great liberation. For now you see that the work is not out there. The work is not to fix the person, correct the behavior, or manage the situation. The work is to remain steadfast in the awareness that there is no cause operating here but God. Once this is seen even faintly, the entire emotional charge of the moment begins to drain away. The insult loses weight. The urgency evaporates. The personal sense deprived of its fuel, begins to quiet. And in that quiet, the next unfoldment becomes possible. Now we come to a most vital point, for here is where the Christ response either begins or where the old habit of reaction quietly resumes under a more respectable name. Every appearance that presents itself to us seeks one thing only, our attention. And attention, when sustained, becomes belief. Belief, when accepted, becomes experience. The moment disrespect appears, the mind instantly forms an image. It may be the image of the person who spoke, the tone they used, the look on their face, the implication of their words, or the meaning we assign to them. This image is not neutral. It is charged. It carries with it a story. I was wronged. I was diminished. I was misunderstood. I must respond. And yet, this image, no matter how vivid, has no substance. It is a mental picture, and mental pictures, as such, have no power of their own. Why take ye thought for your life? Jesus was not merely speaking of food and clothing. He was speaking of images. To take thought is to entertain, rehearse, and sustain a mental picture as if it were reality. And every conflict in human experience is sustained not by events, but by images held in consciousness. When you replay the disrespect, when you rehearse what was said, imagine what you should have said, anticipate what might happen next, you are feeding the image. You are granting it time, energy, and continuity. And in so doing, you are allowing it to appear powerful, persistent, and personal. But Christ consciousness does not deal with images. It sees through them. The second commandment says, "Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image." This is not a warning against statues. It is a warning against mental forms, against frozen pictures of persons, situations, identities, and histories that we mistake for reality. A disrespectful moment, once it has passed, exists nowhere but in thought, and yet thought can resurrect it endlessly unless we withdraw attention. Now, this withdrawal is not repression. It is not denial. It is not pretending nothing happened. It is the quiet recognition that images are not law, not cause, not substance. They are shadows cast by belief. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Not as a man is treated, not as a man is spoken to, but as he thinketh. When you stop feeding the image, you are not ignoring injustice. You are refusing to perpetuate illusion. You are saying, in effect, I will not keep this alive in consciousness. And what is not kept alive cannot govern experience. Jesus never tried to fix appearances directly. He did not address disease as disease. He did not confront sin as sin. He did not argue with hatred as hatred. He withdrew belief from the image and rested in truth. And truth, once recognized, dissolved the image without effort. Consider the woman taken in adultery. The crowd held a collective image of guilt, shame, law-breaking, and punishment. Jesus did not argue with them. He did not analyze the situation. He did not plead. He stooped down and wrote on the ground. He withdrew attention. He refused to energize the image. And one by one, the accusers left. Why? Because the image lost its power when it was no longer fed. This is the heart of non-reaction, not silence for the sake of politeness, not self-control for the sake of appearance, but a conscious refusal to give mental hospitality to images that deny God's government. You will notice something important here. The moment you stop feeding the image, the personal sense begins to starve. The I that wants to respond, explain, justify, or retaliate finds nothing to work with. It depends entirely on pictures. Take away the picture, and the emotional charge fades. This is why Christ consciousness is effortless. It does not struggle with error. It simply ceases to entertain it. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. What mind is that? A mind that does not cling to appearances, a mind that does not preserve insult as memory, a mind that does not rehearse injury as identity, a mind that rests in what is eternally true and allows what is false to fall away by its own nothingness. When you stop feeding the image, you have taken the first active step of the Christ response, though it appears outwardly as doing nothing. And in this doing nothing, you are actually aligning with the highest spiritual law. For now the ground is cleared, the noise subsides, the inner atmosphere becomes still enough for something deeper to emerge, and that deeper emergence is the recognition of divine love, not as sentiment, but as perception. Now, as the image loses its hold and the mental noise subsides, we are brought naturally, not by effort, but by grace, to the first great element of Christ consciousness, divine love. And it is essential here that we understand clearly what divine love is, lest we mistake it for something human and attempt to practice it with the will. Divine love is not affection. It is not liking. It is not approving. It is not excusing behavior. Divine love is perception. It is the ability to behold what God beholds and nothing else. God is love. And because God is love, God does not look out upon his creation and see offenders, aggressors, sinners, or enemies. God sees only himself expressed. Therefore, divine love is not something you generate toward another. It is something you yield to within yourself. The moment you try to love someone humanly who has disrespected you, you will fail. Human love is conditional. It measures worth. It remembers injury. It says, I will love you if. And this is why human love has no healing power. It fluctuates with mood, memory, and circumstance. But divine love has no conditions because it has no object. It does not rest upon personality. It does not evaluate character. It does not take behavior into account. Divine love beholds spiritual identity and spiritual identity alone. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. Righteous judgment is not the assessment of behavior. It is the recognition of being. It is the quiet acknowledgement, this that appears before me is not the truth of God's creation. And because divine love sees only truth, it cannot be offended. Now, this does not mean you pretend the human behavior does not exist. It means you refuse to identify the person with it. You no longer say, he disrespected me, or she insulted me. You say silently and without effort, this is not the being God created. And in that moment, something remarkable happens. The emotional charge dissolves, not because you have forgiven with effort, but because there is nothing left to forgive. Forgiveness, in its highest sense, is not an act. It is the absence of judgment. Neither do I condemn thee. Jesus did not say, I will try to forgive you. He said, I do not condemn you. Why? Because condemnation had never entered his consciousness. And where condemnation is absent, forgiveness becomes unnecessary. It is already accomplished. Divine love does not struggle to overcome resentment. It never meets resentment at all. It looks through it. It sees beyond it. It recognizes it as a false sense arising from belief in separation. And because divine love recognizes no separation, it cannot sustain conflict. Here we must be very still within ourselves. For the temptation will arise to turn divine love into a practice. Now I must see them as spiritual. Now I must love them. But this again places the burden on the personal sense of I. Divine love is not something you do. It is something that reveals itself when judgment is relinquished. Love your enemies. This was not a command to emotion. It was a revelation of vision. Your enemy is only your enemy because you see them as other than yourself. But when you behold only the Christ, the concept of enemy vanishes. You cannot love an enemy. You can only love when the enemy is no longer there. And now we see why divine love is inseparable from non-reaction. Reaction is judgment in motion. Love is judgment dissolved. When you cease to judge the appearance, love stands revealed not as sentiment, but as spiritual clarity. This is why divine love heals. It does not attempt to change people. It does not try to correct conduct. It does not interfere with human affairs. It simply removes the false verdict. And when the verdict is removed, the sentence disappears. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. But what is sown in divine love, nothing personal, nothing human, nothing condemning, only truth. And truth does not react. Truth does not defend. Truth does not argue. Truth stands. And in standing, it dissolves error without opposition. As divine love begins to take its place in consciousness, not by force, but by recognition, you will notice that the need to respond diminishes further. You are no longer holding yourself back. There is simply no impulse to strike, correct, or explain. The personal sense fades into the background, and something universal takes its place. This prepares the way for the next unfoldment, one that deepens divine love into a practical stance of being expressed in a simple yet radical realization. Now we arrive at a point that may sound severe to the human ear, yet is among the most liberating realizations of the Christ life. It is summed up in a phrase that appears again and again in Scripture, sometimes plainly, sometimes veiled. I know you not. And unless this is understood spiritually, it can be terribly misunderstood. I know you not is not rejection. It is not denial of existence. It is not withdrawal of care or responsibility. It is the refusal to identify being with appearance. When Jesus said, "Who is my mother and who are my brethren?" he was not denying relationship. He was lifting relationship out of the personal sense and into the spiritual. When he said, "Ye are from beneath, I am from above," he was not condemning humanity. He was distinguishing between what is born of spirit and what is born of belief. So when we speak here of the practice of I know you not, we are speaking of an inner stance, never an outer declaration. It is something you say silently, not to a person, but to a belief. You are saying, in effect, I do not know this version of you. I do not recognize this appearance as identity. Why is this necessary? Because as long as you know a person as rude, unjust, aggressive, dismissive, or unkind, you have granted reality to the appearance, and whatever you grant reality to, you must then struggle with. You must forgive it, manage it, protect yourself from it, or overcome it. But Christ consciousness does not wrestle with appearances. It denies them entrance. Henceforth know we no man after the flesh. That is not poetry. It is law. To know someone after the flesh is to know them as personality, history, temperament, behavior, and reputation. And that kind of knowing binds you to reaction. But to know no man after the flesh is to know only what God knows, and God knows only his own image and likeness. This is not something you do to another. It is something that happens when you stop consulting the senses for truth. For the senses will always testify to separation, difference, offense, and threat. The senses know only form. Spirit knows only being. And so, when disrespect appears, the Christ response deepens into this realization. I do not know you as disrespectful. I do not know you as hostile. I do not know you as an offender. I know only that which the Father knows. This is the meaning of forgiveness 70 times 7. Not repeated acts of moral pardon, but the continual refusal to accept a false identity. Each time the appearance presents itself, forgiveness says, this is not real. And in that recognition, the appearance loses continuity. Now, the human mind protests. It says, but what if they continue? What if the behavior repeats? What if they never change? These questions arise only when we believe the behavior is attached to the being, but divine love separates the two completely. It sees behavior as an appearance and being as eternal. Jesus did not fear repetition of error because he did not believe error had memory, intelligence, or law. He knew that what is not of God cannot sustain itself. There is nothing that defileth, nothing, not words, not actions, not insults, not accusations. Only belief defiles, and belief can be withdrawn. I know you not is the inner withdrawal of belief from personality. It is the refusal to carry another person's misperception of themselves into your consciousness. It is the end of mental companionship with appearances. And here something extraordinary occurs. The moment you stop knowing a person as their offense, you also stop knowing yourself as the offended one. The two rise and fall together. For the offender and the offended are two sides of the same illusion. When one disappears, the other cannot remain. This is why Christ consciousness brings such profound freedom. You are no longer imprisoned in reaction, not because you have trained yourself to be calm, but because there is no one left to react as the personal sense dissolves naturally when it is no longer fed by images and identities. And let us be clear, this does not prevent right action. It does not mean boundaries will never be set or words never spoken. But whatever action arises now arises impersonally, without heat, without resentment, without the need to protect an image of self. It is no longer I responding to you. It is the Father revealing order. For the Son can do nothing of himself, but what he seeth the Father do. When you no longer know another after the flesh, you also no longer act from the flesh. Action becomes clean, simple, often minimal, and sometimes, most often, no action at all is required. This is the deep work of Christ's response. It is not dramatic, it does not impress the world, but it leaves behind a trail of peace, clarity, and quiet authority that speaks far louder than reaction ever could. And now, having withdrawn identity from the appearance, we are ready for the next and necessary release, the release of condemnation not only from the other, but from yourself. Now we come to a point of great tenderness and great freedom. For here many earnest seekers unknowingly bind themselves again to the very illusion they are seeking to transcend. They may no longer condemn another, yet they turn inward and condemn themselves. They may say, I should not have reacted, or I should be further along, or why do I still feel this? And in so doing, they quietly resurrect the personal sense of self under the guise of spirituality. Let us be clear. Condemnation has no place in Christ consciousness, whether directed outward or inward. Condemnation in any form is judgment, and judgment is the belief that there is a self apart from God that can fail, offend, succeed, or fall short. Judge not, and ye shall not be judged. Condemn not, and ye shall not be condemned. This is not a moral instruction. It is a spiritual law. As long as condemnation is active anywhere in consciousness, it will appear everywhere. You cannot condemn another without condemning yourself, and you cannot condemn yourself without seeing the world as condemning. When disrespect appears and a reaction follows, the Christ response is not to scold yourself into stillness. That only strengthens the false I that believes it must perform spirituality correctly. Instead, the Christ response is to recognize gently, this reaction has no power, no history, no authority, and then to let it pass without commentary. Jesus never said to the sinner, do better next time. He said, neither do I condemn thee. And that same law applies within your own consciousness. The moment you condemn yourself for reacting, you have accepted the belief that there is a self that must be improved, corrected, or disciplined into holiness. But holiness is not attained. It is revealed. God is your selfhood. If God is your selfhood, then who is there to condemn? Who is there to fail? Who is there to fall short? The very idea collapses under spiritual scrutiny. Condemnation depends upon separation. Where separation is not believed, condemnation cannot survive. Here is a truth that must be held quietly, reverently, and without debate. The reaction did not come from you. It came from the belief in a self apart from God. And that belief is not personal. It is universal, and it is impersonal. It has no intelligence, no will, no continuity of its own. It operates only when believed, and it dissolves when seen. This is why Paul tells us, there is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus. Not less condemnation, not forgiven condemnation, no condemnation. And this includes the subtle condemnation that says, I should have handled that better. Christ consciousness does not review the past to assign grades. It does not measure progress. It does not keep score. It abides in what is present and eternal. And what is present and eternal is God, fully expressing himself as your being here and now. When condemnation is removed from both sides, something extraordinary happens. The emotional residue disappears. The moment is complete. It does not trail behind you as memory, regret, or rehearsal. It ends where it occurred. This is spiritual freedom. The world teaches us to process events endlessly. Christ consciousness teaches us to release them instantly, not by suppression, but by understanding. Where there is understanding, there is nothing to process. Love covereth a multitude of sin, not because sins are excused, but because they are not seen as reality. Love does not cover error by hiding it. Love covers error by seeing only truth. And now, free from condemning the other and free from condemning yourself, you stand in a neutral, open consciousness. There is no accuser here. There is no defendant here. There is only presence. This is the holy ground from which the next realization unfolds naturally. The recognition that when there is only one power, there is no need to defend. Now we come to the second great pillar of Christ consciousness. And it is here that fear finally loses its foundation. For as long as we believe there are two powers operating in the universe, one that supports us and one that opposes us, we will feel compelled to defend ourselves. Defense is the natural posture of duality. But Christ consciousness knows no duality, because it knows only one power. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. This is not theology. This is not doctrine. This is not philosophy. This is spiritual law. And when this law is understood, not merely repeated, but realized, the entire structure of fear collapses. Defense assumes danger. Danger assumes an opposing power. An opposing power denies God. This is why Jesus never defended himself, not before the Pharisees, not before Pilate, not before the crowd. He did not explain, he did not justify, he did not correct the record. Why? Because he did not acknowledge that another power was operating that required his intervention. Think of this carefully. If disrespect truly had power, then you would be right to defend yourself. If insult could alter your being, then silence would be foolish. If another person's words could diminish the life of God as you, then reaction would be necessary. But none of this is true. There is no power in disrespect. There is no power in opinion. There is no power in accusation. These appear powerful only when they are believed to operate independently of God. I am the Lord, and there is none else. This is not a poetic affirmation. It is the revelation that removes the necessity for self-protection. When God is known as the only power, what is left to resist? What is left to overcome? What is left to fear? The human sense of I believes it must guard its image, its reputation, its standing, its worth. But Christ consciousness knows that worth is not conferred by people and cannot be taken away by them. It is inherent. It is God-given. It is self-sustaining. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. When this is realized, defense becomes unnecessary, not because you have trained yourself to be calm, but because there is nothing left to protect. The personal sense fades, and with it fades the fear that something essential could be lost. Now let us be honest. The belief in two powers is deeply ingrained. It shows itself subtly. We may say we believe in God, yet we still fear disease. We may trust God, yet we still fear lack. We may speak of love, yet we still fear rejection or disrespect. These fears reveal where we are still acknowledging a power apart from God. But Christ consciousness does not attempt to use God's power against something. It does not say, God, overcome this disrespect. That still acknowledges the disrespect as power. Christ consciousness simply rests in the understanding that there is nothing here to overcome. What did Jesus say to the storm? Peace, be still. He did not fight the storm. He did not fear the storm. He did not analyze the storm. He did not even credit it with authority. And the storm ceased not because it was defeated, but because it was never power. This is the same law that operates in human relationships. When disrespect appears and you do not defend, you are not allowing harm. You are refusing to acknowledge harm as power. And that refusal is the most potent form of spiritual authority. The world believes strength is found in resistance. Christ reveals that strength is found in resting in one power. The world says, Stand up for yourself. Christ says, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Stand still does not mean do nothing. It means do not move from truth. It means do not abandon the realization of one power to engage in the illusion of two. And now something profound becomes evident. As the need to defend disappears, so does the fear of being misunderstood. So does the fear of being judged. So does the fear of being wronged. Why? Because fear itself is born of duality. Where there is one power, fear has no ground. Perfect love casteth out fear. Perfect love is not emotion. It is the realization of one power. And when that realization dawns, even faintly, the nervous system relaxes, the mind quiets, and the urge to react dissolves. You are not protecting yourself anymore. You are resting in God. And from this resting, something else begins to unfold. Something subtle, quiet, and deeply liberating. The personal sense of I, which once rushed to defend, begins to recede. It loses its central position, and in its place, another way of being emerges. Now let us look directly at something we have all observed and perhaps experienced many times. Why arguments escalate. Why a simple exchange so quickly turns into conflict, tension, and estrangement. The answer is not psychological, and it is not emotional. It is spiritual. Arguments escalate because they worship the appearance. The moment we argue with a person, a condition, or a situation, we have already granted it power. We have said, silently or aloud, this appearance matters. This appearance must be corrected. This appearance can harm me or another. But Christ consciousness never deals with appearances. It does not engage them, analyze them, resist them, or improve them. It sees through them. Judge not according to the appearance, but judge righteous judgment. Righteous judgment is not evaluation. It is recognition. It is the recognition that what appears is not what is. And when that recognition is present, the appearance loses its authority to provoke response. Consider this carefully. The moment you attempt to correct disrespect on a personal level, you have already accepted disrespect as real, operative, and influential. You may correct it politely or forcefully, spiritually or emotionally, but the very act of engagement declares this has power. This is why arguments never end arguments. They only deepen them. Each side is attempting to assert power over what both believe to be real. And since neither is resting in the truth of one power, the struggle continues. Jesus never argued with error. He did not debate the Pharisees in order to convince them. He did not attempt to reform appearances. He spoke truth, and truth dissolved the false premise, or it exposed it. And when exposure was not received, he withdrew. He that hath ears to hear, let him hear. Truth does not shout. Truth does not pursue. Truth does not need agreement. Truth stands. Arguments escalate because they move horizontally, person to person, mind to mind, opinion to opinion. Christ consciousness moves vertically from God to expression. It does not meet error where it appears. It meets it at its source, which is belief. Now, understand this clearly. Refusing to argue is not avoidance. It is not weakness. It is not passivity. It is authority. It is the authority that comes from knowing that nothing real is at stake. When Jesus stood silent before Pilate, it was not because he had nothing to say. It was because nothing needed to be said. Pilate was addressing an appearance. Jesus was abiding in reality. Thou couldst have no power at all against me, except it were given thee from above. That statement alone dissolves every argument ever waged by the personal sense. It reveals that no authority exists apart from God. And if no authority exists apart from God, then no human opinion can threaten truth. When disrespect arises and you feel the impulse to respond, pause, not to restrain yourself, but to see, ask nothing, explain nothing, correct nothing. Simply see what is being presented here as power. And the moment you see it, you will know it has none. The appearance may continue for a moment. It may persist briefly, but it will not escalate in consciousness where it is not believed. Fire requires fuel. Argument requires belief. Reaction requires acceptance. Resist not evil. This does not mean tolerate wrongdoing or submit to harm. It means do not grant evil the dignity of reality. Do not elevate appearance into power by wrestling with it. Stand in truth and let truth reveal itself. Now here is a subtle but crucial point. Christ consciousness does not wait for appearances to change in order to be at peace. Peace is not a result. It is a state of being. And from that state, appearances change or lose relevance entirely. When you do not worship the appearance, you are no longer its servant. And when you are no longer its servant, it no longer commands your energy, your attention, or your life. And something else happens, something unexpected. The world begins to respond differently, not always immediately, not always visibly, but inevitably, because consciousness is the law of experience, as within, so without. And now, having seen why arguments escalate, we are ready to move into a deeper understanding of what actually dissolves them, not by strategy, not by technique, but by presence. Now we approach one of the most misunderstood and most powerful elements of Christ consciousness: silent recognition. Not silence as withdrawal, not silence as suppression, but silence as realization. Most people believe that silence means doing nothing. In truth, silence is the highest form of spiritual activity. It is the activity of recognition without interference. Be still and know that I am God. Notice that the command is not do, but know. And this knowing is not intellectual. It is not repeating truths. It is not mentally declaring affirmations. It is the quiet awareness that God alone is present and operative. When disrespect appears, the personal sense rushes forward to name it, interpret it, respond to it, and store it. Christ consciousness does none of these things. It simply recognizes this is not power, this is not law, this is not reality. And that recognition does not need words. Words belong to the mind. Recognition belongs to consciousness. And consciousness is the field in which experience unfolds. Jesus often healed without speaking. He did not announce what he was doing. He did not explain the error. He simply saw, and in that seeing, the appearance dissolved. He saw the leper as clean. He saw the sinner as whole. He saw the dead as alive. And because he did not project thought outward, but rested inward, the recognition became law. True spiritual work is never done at the level of thought. It is done at the level of being. Thought can describe truth, but it cannot enact it. Recognition enacts truth because it aligns consciousness with reality. This is why silent recognition is so powerful. It bypasses argument, bypasses resistance, bypasses the personal sense entirely. It does not attempt to change the other person. It does not attempt to improve the situation. It does not even attempt to be peaceful. It simply is. I and my Father are one. That statement is not spoken into conflict. It is lived in the midst of it. And when it is lived, conflict has nothing to attach itself to. Now here is the great secret. Silent recognition is not directed at the person who appears to be disrespectful. It is directed at your own consciousness. You are not sending anything to them. You are not correcting them mentally. You are not holding them in truth. You are resting in truth. This distinction is vital. The moment you try to hold another person in truth, you have made them an object. You have entered the realm of duality again. Christ consciousness knows no them to be worked upon. There is only God appearing as infinite expression. So when disrespect arises, the practice is not to think God is love repeatedly, or this has no power, over and over. Those are still mental activities. The practice is to sink beneath thought into awareness. Here, in this awareness, you do not deny the appearance. You simply do not acknowledge it as real. And what is not acknowledged cannot sustain itself. The carnal mind is enmity against God. The carnal mind is the mind that reacts, judges, categorizes, defends, and attacks. Christ consciousness does not fight the carnal mind. It ignores it. And what is ignored in consciousness loses influence. Silent recognition does not require effort. In fact, effort prevents it. The more you try to be silent, the noisier the mind becomes. The more you try to recognize truth, the more you remain in thought. Recognition comes when effort ceases. This is why Jesus often withdrew, not to escape people, but to rest in consciousness. He was not preparing words. He was not planning responses. He was aligning with reality. And when he returned, authority flowed effortlessly, not because he asserted it, but because nothing opposed it in his consciousness. Now, understand this clearly. Silent recognition is not something you do after being triggered. It is something that replaces triggering altogether. As this consciousness develops, fewer things disturb you, not because you are numb, but because fewer things appear real. And this brings us to a profound transformation. As silent recognition becomes natural, something within you begins to dissolve, not forcefully, not dramatically, but gently and permanently. The personal sense of I begins to fade. Now we arrive at a point that cannot be forced, cannot be hurried, and cannot be achieved by will. It comes only as a natural fruit of the previous realizations. When judgment is gone, when condemnation is gone, when the belief in two powers is gone, when appearances are no longer worshipped, and when silent recognition has become familiar, then something happens of its own accord. The personal sense of I begins to disappear. This does not mean the body vanishes. It does not mean personality is erased. It does not mean life becomes passive or inert. It means that the center of experience is no longer a self trying to live spiritually, but spirit living as self. I can, of mine own self, do nothing. Notice that Jesus does not say, I choose not to do anything, but I can do nothing. This is not humility as a virtue. It is the recognition that there is no personal doer. There is only God expressing. Reaction requires a center. It requires an I that can be offended, threatened, diminished, or elevated. When that center is gone, reaction has nowhere to land. It is like throwing a stone into empty space. The insult may still be spoken. The tone may still be sharp. The behavior may still appear unjust. But there is no longer an inner mechanism to receive it. Nothing inside agrees to be hurt. Why? Because there is no longer a personal me there to protect. This is not indifference. It is freedom. Before this realization, even our spirituality may have been personal. I am trying to be patient. I am trying not to react. I am practicing forgiveness. And as long as that I remains active, struggle remains. But when the personal I dissolves, forgiveness is no longer something you practice. It is something you are. Non-reaction is no longer something you attempt. It is simply what occurs. Yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. This is not a poetic statement. It is a description of consciousness. It is the end of self-reference. It is the end of measuring yourself against ideals. It is the end of wondering whether you handled something correctly. There is no you left to evaluate. Now, this must be understood carefully. The disappearance of the personal I does not make you irresponsible. It does not remove discernment. It does not mean you allow abuse or injustice to continue. But action, when it occurs, comes from clarity, not reaction. Sometimes silence will follow. Sometimes words will arise. Sometimes movement will happen. But none of it will come from fear, hurt, or the need to assert identity. The Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. This is the key. When the personal I steps aside, action becomes effortless, timely, and exact. There is no rehearsal beforehand and no regret afterward. There is no emotional residue. This is how Jesus could speak sharply at times and remain in love. This is how he could overturn tables without anger. This is how he could walk away without bitterness. The action was not personal. And now let us address a fear that arises at this point. Many ask, if I lose the personal I, will I become weak? Will I be taken advantage of? Will I disappear? No, the opposite occurs. The personal I is weak because it is finite. Christ consciousness is strong because it is infinite. The personal self must defend. The Christ has nothing to lose. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? Fear disappears, not because danger has been removed, but because the one who could be endangered is no longer believed in. This is why Christ consciousness is fearless, not bravado, not recklessness, but calm certainty. It does not rush forward or retreat. It abides. And now something extraordinary begins to show itself in daily life. Situations that once triggered reaction no longer do. Conversations that once escalated now dissolve quickly or never arise at all. Not because others have changed, but because consciousness has, as within, so without. The world does not respond to personality, it responds to consciousness. And when consciousness is impersonal, unified, and free of judgment, the world mirrors that order in ways that often surprise us. But the true gift is not outer harmony. It is inner freedom. The freedom of not carrying emotional burdens forward. The freedom of not replaying conversations. The freedom of not defending a self-image. This is the peace that passeth understanding. And now, standing at this point, we are ready for the final realization, the one that seals the work and makes it permanent. For when Christ consciousness is understood as God living itself, there is no longer effort, no longer practice, no longer concern about maintaining it. Now we come to the final resting place of this unfoldment, and it is here that all strain ceases. Up to this point, there may have been moments of watching, moments of remembering, moments of recognition, but now even that fades. For here we learn that the responsibility was never ours. The government shall be upon his shoulder, not upon yours, not upon your understanding, not upon your vigilance, discipline, or consistency. The moment you believe it is your task to maintain Christ consciousness, you have already stepped back into the personal sense. Christ consciousness is not sustained by effort. It is revealed by surrender. This is the point at which many sincere seekers become weary. They say, I understand these truths, but I cannot live them consistently. And the answer is simple and liberating. You were never meant to. Ye have not chosen me, but I have chosen you. Christ is not something you adopt. Christ is what you awaken to as already established. It lives itself. It governs itself. It expresses itself. And your only function is to stop interfering. Now, let us be very clear. Surrender is not resignation. It is not passivity. It is not withdrawal from life. It is the conscious relinquishment of the belief that you are the doer, the manager, the protector, or the corrector. When Jesus said, take no thought for your life, he was not advising irresponsibility. He was revealing the law that thought does not govern life, consciousness does. And consciousness is not something you manipulate, it is something you yield to. At this stage, the question, how should I respond, no longer arises. The response, if any, appears. Sometimes words come. Sometimes silence comes. Sometimes action comes. But it is not preceded by anxiety or followed by regret. Why? Because it was not personal. The Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. This peace is not emotional calm. It is spiritual assurance. It is the knowing that nothing is required of you to make God operative. God does not wait for your cooperation. God does not depend on your understanding. God is. And when you stop trying to live spiritually, something remarkable happens. Spirituality lives you. This is what Paul meant when he said, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling, and then immediately added, for it is God which worketh in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. Notice God wills. God does. You witness. At this point, even the concern about reacting disappears. You are no longer watching yourself to see whether you respond correctly. You are no longer measuring progress. You are no longer correcting tendencies. Those belong to the personal sense, and the personal sense is fading. Now life becomes simple. Not easy in the human sense, but simple in the spiritual sense. There is no division between inner and outer. There is no effort to apply truth. There is only truth revealing itself as harmony. And if a moment arises where reaction seems to occur, there is no discouragement, no analysis, no self-judgment. It passes like a shadow across a still lake and leaves no trace. Why? because there is no longer a self there to carry it forward. My peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth, give I unto you. The world's peace depends on conditions behaving properly. Christ's peace is independent of conditions altogether. It is the peace of being governed by God. Now hear this carefully, for it is the final release. You do not need to complete this work. It completes itself. The Christ that has been revealed to you will not let you go. It will correct gently. It will withdraw you from struggle. It will lead you inward when outward effort becomes tempting, and it will do so without strain. Your only responsibility, if we may even call it that, is to remain available, to listen when the inward nudge comes, to rest when rest is given, to speak when speech arises, to be silent when silence is full, and above all, to trust that the life which awakened you is the life that sustains you. He which hath begun a good work in you will perform it until the day of Jesus Christ. There is no fear here, no urgency, no timetable, no standard to meet, only unfolding. And so we end where we began, not with instruction, but with assurance. Be still, let be, it is done. And now, having spoken these words, we do not carry them forward as something to remember, something to apply, or something to practice. We let them fall away. Truth does not remain as language. Truth remains as consciousness. There is nothing more to be done. The Christ that has revealed itself to you in this hour is not dependent on your memory of these words. It does not require repetition. It does not ask for maintenance. It lives because it is life. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth keep silence before him. And so we come into that silence, not to wait for something to happen, not to improve our state, not to receive a message, but simply to be present where God is present, to be still where God is still. In this stillness, there is no question of judgment or forgiveness. Those belong to the realm of duality. Here, there is only love, not as sentiment, not as behavior, but as being. The love that sees no enemy, no offender, no self to defend. Here, there is no fear of reaction, because there is no personal center from which reaction could arise. There is only the awareness of God living itself as harmony. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee. And notice, perfect peace is not something given, it is something kept. It is already present, sustained by God, untouched by circumstance. You do not enter it. You recognize that you have never left it. Now, as you move again into the activities of life, do not take this consciousness with you as something fragile. Do not protect it. Do not watch it. Let it be what governs. The government is upon his shoulder. If words are spoken through you, they will be right. If silence remains, it will be full. If action arises, it will be unforced. And if nothing at all seems to happen, that too is perfect. For the Christ is not measured by effect, it is known by peace. My peace I leave with you, not as a farewell, not as a promise, but as a fact. That peace is now, always has been, and always will be the substance of your being. And so we release this moment not into memory, but into life itself. There is nothing to hold, nothing to remember, nothing to complete. It is finished. Let us be still